Long ago, in the days when the moonlight was the only guide at night and the lamps burned dimly in clay homes, there was a rule that no one dared to break. The elders always warned, "Do not sweep your home at night, for it is a great taboo." The words carried the weight of generations, and no one dared to question them. In those times, the days were busy with farming, weaving, and trading, and the nights were sacred, a time of rest and storytelling. At sunset, mothers would gather their children and say, "Put the broom down. The spirits of our ancestors watch over us, and they will be angered if you sweep at night." Young Amma, a curious girl, often wondered why such a simple act could invite the wrath of the ancestors. She would sit outside her family's small hut, staring at the broom propped against the wall, her small mind full of questions. "Mama," she asked one evening, "why do the ancestors get angry if we sweep at night?" Her mother glanced at her sharply, her face grave. "Amma, it is not your place to ask such questions. Obey the rule, and you will have peace. Disobey, and you may lose something precious." Amma nodded, though her heart remained restless. She could not understand how the spirits were connected to a simple broom, but she dared not ask further, for now. The elders of the village often spoke in riddles, their words laced with warnings that seemed to have no end. Among these was the sweeping taboo, whispered in every home once darkness fell. Amma grew up hearing these words, but as she grew older, her curiosity only deepened. One afternoon, as the sun rested high in the sky, Amma sat near the village square where the elders gathered. She listened as Elder Adjoa, with her deep and steady voice, spoke of a time when a young girl had defied the rule. She swept her home after the cock crowed for the last time, Elder Adjoa began, her eyes scanning the small crowd. And what did she sweep away? A golden bead, a gift from her ancestors. It was lost in the darkness, and from that day her family faced nothing but hardship. Crops failed, sickness came, and their name was cursed. The villagers murmured in agreement, nodding solemnly. Amma's heart raced as she heard the story. Could such misfortune truly come from a broom? She looked at the elders and the families around her, all nodding in belief. But something inside her whispered that there was more to this tale than beads and curses. Amma decided she would one day uncover the truth, though she knew that to do so might invite the scorn of her people, or worse, the ancestors themselves. In the olden days, the villagers revered their ancestors with unwavering devotion. They believed that the spirits of those who had walked the earth before them watched over their lives, offering blessings and punishments as they saw fit. To anger the ancestors was the greatest fear of all. Amma often heard stories of how the ancestors communicated their displeasure. "They will send a cold wind through your door," her grandmother once said, "or they will cause your fire to go out, no matter how brightly it burns. If you sweep at night, you invite their wrath, for it is as though you are sweeping them away." These words were repeated so often that they became truth in the minds of the villagers. Amma, however, began to question them. One evening, as her family gathered around the fire, she asked her older brother Kwame, "Do you think the ancestors would truly punish us over sweeping?" Kwame frowned and shook his head. "Don't speak like that, Amma. Even if it's not true, why take the risk? Our parents and their parents before them followed the rule. It's not for us to change." But Amma was not satisfied with his answer. She could not help but wonder if the ancestors were truly watching, or if the rule served some other purpose. Amma was a child of questions, and in those days, questions were not always welcomed. The elders believed that children should be seen and not heard, and that wisdom came from listening rather than asking. But Amma's curious nature could not be silenced. One evening, after a long day of helping her mother with chores, Amma sat outside her home, staring at the broom. The moon was bright, casting silver light over the village. She thought about the stories of ancestors and cursed brooms, and the more she thought, the less sense they made. Her grandmother, sitting nearby and grinding millet, noticed her gaze. "Amma," she said gently, "what troubles you?" "Grandma," Amma began, choosing her words carefully, "why do we say the ancestors get angry when we sweep at night? Is it really true?" Her grandmother smiled faintly, her weathered hands pausing for a moment. "In the old days, Amma, the nights were dark and lamps were few. If someone swept their home in the darkness, they might lose something valuable, a coin, a bead, or even food, and never find it again. The rule was meant to protect us, but over time we spoke of the ancestors, for fear is a stronger teacher than reason." Emma's eyes widened as her grandmother's words sank in. Perhaps the rule had nothing to do with spirits after all. In those days, before electricity reached the villages, darkness came quickly and stayed until dawn. The only light came from the moon and the flickering flames of oil lamps. It was a time when shadows stretched long and deep, and the night held mysteries that no one dared to explore. Amma's grandmother often spoke of those times, her voice soft and full of memory. When the sun set, we would gather in our homes and do no more than necessary. The dark was a thief, Amma. It could hide things from you, things you might never get back. One evening, as they sat by the fire, her grandmother told her a story. "There was a man," she began, "who swept his home one night, thinking he was doing good by keeping it clean. But in the darkness, he swept away a small pouch of cowries. He did not see it fall, and by morning, it was gone. Without it, he could not pay his debts, and his family suffered greatly." Amma listened, her young mind piecing together the truth. The rule against sweeping at night was not just about ancestors. It was about protecting the things people valued most. Yet, she wondered why such a practical lesson had been cloaked in fear. In the days when lanterns were scarce, the people of the village learned to live carefully with the night. The faint glow of the lanterns could only light small spaces, leaving the corners of homes in deep shadows. For this reason, many tasks were left for the daylight, and sweeping was one of them. Emma's grandmother often told her, "In the darkness, a broom can sweep away more than dirt. A coin, a bead, or even something as small as a kernel of grain could be lost forever." The elders feared the loss of such precious items because, in those times, every little thing mattered. Losing a single coin could mean going without food for days. One evening, as Amma sat listening to her grandmother's tales, she asked, "Grandma, why don't we just use lanterns to see better at night?" Her grandmother chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Amma, oil for lanterns was expensive in those days. We used it sparingly, only when necessary. No one would waste it on sweeping the floor. It was better to wait for the sun's light." Amma thought about this and realized how different life was back then. She imagined the dim glow of a lantern, the shadows dancing on the walls, and the difficulty of seeing even a small object on the floor. It all made sense now, why sweeping at night was discouraged and why the people feared it so much. The sound of a broom sweeping against the clay floor was familiar in the village. It was a rhythmic sound that marked the beginning of a new day. In the mornings, women swept their homes with care, ensuring that every corner was clean before the day's work began. Amma loved the sound, but she noticed it was a sound she never heard at night. One evening, as the village grew quiet and the only sounds were the chirping of crickets, Amma asked her mother, "Why does no one sweep at night? Surely it doesn't make much noise." Her mother gave her a stern look. "Amma, the sound of a broom at night is not just noise. It is said to awaken the spirits. When you sweep at night, you disturb them, and they may take away your blessings." Though Amma nodded, she was not convinced. She had heard the stories many times, but something about them didn't feel right. "But Mama," she insisted, "how can a broom wake up spirits?" Her mother's face softened. "Amma, some things are not for children to question. It is better to obey the elders and avoid trouble." Emma fell silent, but her thoughts continued to race. She couldn't help but wonder if the stories of spirits were created to hide a simpler truth. one that she was determined to uncover someday. The elders of the village were the keepers of its traditions. They sat under the great baobab tree, sharing their wisdom with anyone who would listen. Amma often joined the crowd of children gathered around them, eager to hear their stories. One day, Elder Kwaku leaned on his carved walking stick and began to speak. Long ago, a family ignored the warnings of the ancestors. They swept their home at night, thinking nothing of it.
But as they swept, they unknowingly pushed a sacred bead out of their door. That bead was a blessing from the ancestors, and when it was lost, so was their fortune. The children gasped, their eyes wide with fear. Elder Kwaku continued, that family suffered greatly. Their crops withered, their animals died, and they were left with nothing. This is why we say, never sweep at night. The ancestors watch over us, and we must respect their ways. Amma listened carefully, but she couldn't help but question the story. Why would the ancestors care about a bead? And why did the elders always tell these tales with so much fear? After the gathering ended, Amma walked home deep in thought. She felt there was more to these warnings than the elders were saying, and she promised herself she would one day discover the truth behind their words. The night was a time of mystery in the village. The darkness stretched over the land like a heavy blanket, and the villagers stayed close to their fires. The shadows seemed to move, and every sound felt louder and closer. It was during these hours that Amma felt her curiosity grow stronger. She often sat by the small window of her family's hut, looking out at the quiet village. The broom leaned against the wall nearby, tempting her. She wondered what would happen if she picked it up and swept the floor. Would the ancestors really appear? Would something terrible happen? One night, she asked her grandmother, "What is it about the night that makes sweeping so dangerous? Is it really the ancestors, or is it something else?" Her grandmother looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Amma, in the old days, the night was feared because it hid so much from us. Without light, we couldn't see what we were doing. People lost important things in the dark, things they couldn't afford to lose. The rule was made to protect us, but over time, we began to speak of spirits to make children obey." Amma's eyes widened. For the first time, she felt like she was uncovering the truth. The warnings about the night were not about spirits after all, they were about survival. Amma began to think more about the stories of lost treasures. She remembered one tale in particular, told by Elder Ajoa. It was the story of a woman who had swept her home at night and accidentally pushed a small pouch of gold coins into the yard. The next morning, Elder Ajoa had said, the woman searched everywhere but could not find the pouch. The family was poor, and those coins were all they had. They believed the ancestors had taken them as punishment for sweeping at night.